Hello.
Hello, how are you?
Yeah, pretty good. Excited. This is our final category. We haven't shown people yet.
Yes, and we're definitely not filming this on the same day as the previous video.
What are you doing? What are we just like? We've got different clothes, kind of. The chairs change. You're going to reveal our secrets in every video?
No, I told them we're definitely not.
All right. Well, you might be wondering. I mean, you've read the title. You might have read the description, but maybe you're wondering from us, what are we doing today? And Rob, do you want to tell them what we're doing? The general category?
Yes, we are doing a top 10 list because we're on the internet and you always got to do top 10 lists.
Yes.
And we're doing top 10 fantasy films.
Yes, but like the reason this exists as well is because we have often literally just gone through lists and given our opinion on it. So
And annoyed everyone we work with that is within earshot.
Yeah. They avoid us. And that's why we're here. So yes, top 10 fantasy films of all time. So the way we did it, we each came up with our own and then we combined them. And so now we have 10. This is definitive. It is not changing. So with that, should we just get started? Okay, so first of all, before we launch into the list, we should talk about our own affinity for the genre really quick. So I'll begin because I am the biggest fantasy nerd. I love all things fantasy, whether that's in games, whether that's in movies, whether that's in TV shows. If it's fantasy, you've immediately piqued my interest.
I mean, yeah, I like fantasy. Clearly not as much as yourself. I think it is, there are certainly plenty of fantasy films that I would count as among my favorite films of all time and just fantasy stories in general.
Some of which we'll talk about today.
But it's not one of the genres where I would just sort of like, I mean, you've just said, as soon as it's fantasy, you're in.
Yeah.
That's not the case with fantasy for me. Fantasy is just another genre that I like.
There you go. So with that, much more affinity, whatever, lover, liker. I think that's an easier way of saying it.
In the last video, we established that I can't read. She can't speak. Okay?
Okay.
Yeah.
Except that's going to be the next video. We're filming them in the wrong order. But with that, Rob, would you like to start? What is the 10th best fantasy film of all time?
So, according to our agreed poll, the 10th best fantasy film of all time, which was one of your suggested ones, is Stardust.
Yes.
Which is directed by Matthew Vaughn, stars Charlie Cox.
Yep.
Robert De Niro,
Claire Danes,
Michelle Pfeiffer,
Henry
Cavill's in there.
Yep. Sienna Miller. Take your pick, really.
Yeah, it's like it's one of these movies where when you did mention it, I was like, oh yeah, Stardust.
Yeah.
It's a film that is like a lot of Matthew Vaughn movies. You can't really fault it on a narrative level, on a storytelling level, on a character level, on an enjoyment level. Matthew Vaughn, he creates almost, in most cases, perfect standalone movies that you can't really find any flaw in.
It's magical. It's got the hero's story at its center. You know, the classical.
You can't help but smile.
Can't help but smile. It has a really nice flow in the way it begins. And the way that it's told, it feels like a modern fairy tale. And the way it's presented and the look. I mean, you know, it has that thing where it subverts expectation as well.
Yeah.
And I just love that, again, it's one of those movies where it somehow managed to cast people that would end up being really big later on or really known later on.
Yeah.
Specifically Charlie Cox and Henry Cavill.
And that's helped raise the film's profile a bit because for the longest time, it's really flown under the radar.
Like, I don't think it had the reception it should have had.
If it came out now, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so if you haven't seen it in a while, definitely recommend checking it out. So let's get into number 9. I'll introduce this one. And this was also one that I originated on my list. And that is Big Fish. So directed by Tim Burton, starring one of my favorite actors of all time, Ewan McGregor. I love him so much. And then also starring Danny DeVito, Jessica Lange, Albert Finney.
I think so. I haven't seen it in a while.
Yeah. But it stars quite a few people, and it is one of the best representations of magical realism. It's probably my favorite Tim Burton movie. I know that's quite intense
it
to
is
say.
up there for him, and
Yeah.
it was actually one of the turning points for me because I, in my teenage years, was a angsty little prick who
Who wasn't?
who didn't appreciate the artistry of Tim Burton. It took me an embarrassingly long time to actually like his style.
It makes me cry, it makes me laugh, it makes me sad, and I'm never disappointed by a watch. Almost, what is it, like 20 years later almost?
2003.
Yeah, so pretty much at the 20-year mark, and also it's aged exceptionally well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I couldn't not have it on this list because again, it's one of those, similar to Stardust, it's one of those movies that you don't think about, but everyone I know who has seen it or that I've shown it to has loved it.
So now we're on to number 8, and I gotta be honest, I would not have had this on my list. And, you know, obviously I had to make some compromises and I had to agree to put it on here, and now I've got to talk about it. And that is Labyrinth.
We will be doing a retrospective on this movie. We will,
God help me.
eventually.
Yeah. So that is Labyrinth, which I have seen, and this is the one starring David Bowie and Jennifer Connelly.
I think this was her first film?
No, Once Upon a Time in America was her first film, but she was a bit younger then.
First proper film.
I mean,
First proper role. There you go.
Role. Yeah. Thank you. So I think the thing with Labyrinth, it was Jim Henson, isn't it?
Jim Henson. It's the movie that killed him.
Yes. So Jim Henson, who also is like famous for the Dark Crystal
And
series
Muppets.
and the Muppets, and it's very much in that style. I think
Dark Crystal, not Muppets.
Yeah, Dark Crystal. If you're into that sort of thing, like if you're into Dark Crystal, this is just like catnip. It's gold. And I appreciate that. Look, I'll admit, like, yeah, sure, when I saw that film and Jennifer Connelly's in there, yeah, I fell in love. Obviously, who wouldn't?
Yeah, even
Who
though it's
wouldn't?
kind of weird that a 15-year-old, like a 37-year-old man is preying on a 15-year-old, but you know, it's a fantasy
I saw
film,
it when
it's
I was
fine.
15, it was fine.
No, not you. I meant David Bowie's character.
Okay, sure.
I mean, so David Bowie's like 39 and then she's like 15 and he's like, I love you, Sarah. And then it's like, ooh, but it's okay because he's probably actually like hundreds of years old. So it's like beyond, you know, it's that like, I'm a ancient elf and I'm in love with, you know, that sort of weird but not weird thing. Speaking of which, but all that aside, I love this film. I think it's such a fun 80s, right amount of trauma for a child.
Yeah.
Like, again, that really classic fantasy. I love the use of puppets. I love the use of the practical effects in this. The story's just, I'm going to say it's batshit. Like,
That's why it doesn't grab me, I think.
Yeah.
Because it is so batshit.
It's not, ironically
I can't
enough,
plug in.
Yeah.
You know?
I will say, ironically enough, it's not as linear as like something like Dark Crystal.
No.
Like Dark Crystal has a much more linear story, but having said that, I think this is way better than Dark Crystal. Like, I want to watch it all the time. If it hits you and it hits you right, it's got you.
I mean, the thing is I can't deny, and this is why I'm obviously, you know,
That's why it's on the list.
It's why I agreed to have it on the list, is the fact that, like, the film is memorable. Like,
It's magical.
I haven't forgotten it. Like,
Power of the
images are
Babe.
burnt into my brain.
Babe with the power.
Yeah, exactly.
Voodoo.
Yeah.
Hoodoo.
Jesus,
Power
I'm
of the
thinking about
Babe.
fucking Labyrinth. Yeah, like that's the thing. Like, it is a memorable film, which is a lot more than you can say for other films. You know, like,
Even Dark Crystal.
I've seen it once, and it's like, yeah, the images are there.
Which is why we're going to do a retrospective on it. But on that note, let's move on to a film that actually was on your list.
The last three have all been yours.
Hey, you've got, yours are much higher on the list. Leave me alone.
Yeah, say what you will about that.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
Okay, what is number 7? I don't know why I'm asking you. Number 7 is The Green Mile.
The Green Mile is such a heartbreaking film.
I've only seen it once, and there's a reason for that.
I've seen it quite a few times, actually, because even though it is such a heartbreaking movie and it's such a difficult, you know, film on an emotional level, it does exactly what I always want from films about some really, you know, heavy themes and heavy emotion, is that it doesn't make the mistake of thinking that it's all doom and gloom. The film does have moments of light and hope and humor and enjoyment, and it all just feels very, very touching. You know, when you're seeing the characters interact with each other and their actual genuine love for each other and their genuine respect for each other.
Except for Sam Rockwell's character.
Except for Sam Rockwell's character, who is a real son of a bitch. And I think...
Sorry, Rob's mum.
Yeah. Sorry,
swore.
Mum. Yeah. No, I'm not allowed to swear when we're talking about Paddington.
Oh, that fucking bear.
That fucking bear. Yeah. So, yeah, I think The Green Mile just makes you think, it makes you feel, and you can't deny how brilliant of a storyteller and a director Frank Darabont is, and how brilliant the performances of Tom Hanks and Michael Clarke Duncan, and even like the side characters like what was his name, David Morse, who's the big guy,
and Sam Rockwell,
who's fantastic in it too. Yeah. So number 6 on the list,
the first one that's on both of our lists.
That is true, and I think it's because we're both millennials. Harry Potter's in our blood.
It's our generation's definition.
So we couldn't not have a Harry Potter on this list. But we went back and forth as to which one we were going to have on here, and I think we both landed on Prisoner of Azkaban, which I think is very obvious answer for a lot of Harry Potter fans.
When it came out, like, it would have been one of the first movies I saw that had such a dramatic twist, where I was like, "Ooh, Sirius Black,"
Yeah,
Like,
and even now today, everyone knows Sirius Black was a good guy.
Yeah,
but when you watch that sequence,
you had, and the advertising, if you hadn't read the books, like, which a lot of kids, we'd read the books, but like,
maybe my parents read them to me.
But like, you hadn't fully inherited it, like, and a lot of people just watch the movies, and that's totally fine. Because as adaptations go, they're excellent, which is why they're on this list.
But even that scene where he does get revealed and where he first meets Harry and the scene, the shrieking shack,
creepy.
It is creepy, and it's still so tense.
And the werewolf scene, still, I mean, it doesn't give me nightmares anymore because I'm an adult now, but...
Really? It gives me...
The bit with the ankle where Lupin is turning into the werewolf and you see the full transformation and it goes on his ankle and you see his Achilles heel extend. Ooh, that gave me... I was freaking out. Like, I didn't run away. I was able to still watch the film because I was a brave little child. But like... I was like, oh my God, that's horrifying. Because I think up until that point, I feel werewolves were like, oh yeah, werewolves, but this was the first time where I was like, oh, being a werewolf is bad. I don't want to be a werewolf,
One of the major things that actually put this film above the other Harry Potter films is the fact that, like, when you look at, say, most of them, it's like, we're in the school year, we're doing school stuff, and then we go to a place in the school and fight a bad guy. Whereas this was like the first one that showed, no, there's more that we can do to build up to a climax.
And Voldemort's not in it.
Voldemort's not in it. And there's no like, we're fighting this thing in this room or fighting this thing. It's like the climax of that film is literally seeing Harry come into his own as a man.
It's the reason why this series has been able to survive, because it gave license to the other directors to make it their own and not just do Chris Columbus's thing. On that note, we should move on to number 5, which was on your list, but was not on mine. But I still agreed, obviously. It's number 5, halfway, and that is Guillermo del Toro's Pan's Labyrinth.
Yes, Pan's Labyrinth.
You want to say Labyrinth is creepy? My man, this is the most horrifying thing. In the middle here today, we've got a little reference to the movie. Yes. I remember when that movie had come out, I didn't see it in cinemas, but I walked in on, I think my mum watching it on TV, and it was at the moment where, is it Douglas Jones? Is that the actor?
Doug Jones.
Doug Jones, yeah. So he's one of the best character actors, like specifically around weird, creepy aliens. He's currently in Star Trek Discovery as Commander Saru. Yeah, he's really good in it, actually. Okay. But he plays this thing, whatever this thing is, and I walked in on that scene where she's
like the iconic scene.
Yeah, where the character's wandering around and it's like, ooh, food, and I'm definitely like, don't eat that food. No, don't eat that food. As a child, I knew you don't eat that food, and she was like, I'm gonna eat this food, and then the thing.
She was told not to eat the food by Pan.
Yeah, exactly. Which is always like she's gonna eat the food.
Yeah.
And then of course it comes to life and it doesn't have eyes because it's in his hands.
But I love the way that it just pairs or parallels, what is potentially happening in reality to Ophelia, or maybe it's not in reality. I mean, I like to think that it is, because there's things that happen in the film that generally you can't explain.
Yeah.
There's that going on there, and then it's so beautifully is thematically paralleled with the actual war story that's going on in the background, and wrapped into the the ideas around time. And there's so much to chew on.
There's a lot of Spanish mythology, there's Greek mythology, there's like with Pan, but you've also got fairy tale elements and the Alice in Wonderland thing, and so there's so many different levels and references, but it's also its own wholly unique story, and it's terrifying.
Yeah.
So,
but it's at the same time, while being terrifying, it's also just
beautiful.
It's hypnotically beautiful.
It's what Del Toro does best, which is like this grotesque beauty.
Well,
it's like I hate it, but I can't look away.
It's also very touching. Like I think by the end when Ophelia kind of has been killed, but like has she been reunited
Spoiler
with
alert.
when she has been killed, but she's transported back to the nether realm where she is the princess, and she's reunited with her mother and her father, and it's quite touching. And I think that there are many instances in Pan's Labyrinth where I do tear up.
Yeah, I agree. I'm going to make sure that Toby watches the movie before this video comes out, because otherwise he's going to get a big spoiler.
Okay. Sorry, Toby.
That's all good.
Yeah.
All right, but let's move on. Now we come back to a film that was on my list.
Yes, which should have. I feel bad for not having it.
You
on
just
my
forgot.
list.
We get it. This is another one of those like category, like it'll probably be on other categories.
I would have had it on my animation list.
Which is because it's
the animated Beauty and the Beast from 1991.
Beauty and the Beast is like one of my favorite, if not my favorite, Disney film of all time.
No, I agree. I think we've talked about this. The animated Beauty and the Beast is not only my favorite Disney film of all time, it might be my favorite animated film of all time. The psychological complexity of these characters is just beyond what you often see in animated films, let alone live action films.
Yeah. Plus, I would say it's one of Disney's first more believable love stories. Like, sure, people are like, oh, Stockholm Syndrome, whatever. It's not Stockholm Syndrome, but like, she didn't jump him until he was a human. She was probably like, there's literally a whole song where she's like, this is a bit concerning.
Well, I mean, also, if you're interested, Lindsay Ellis, who was a YouTuber I followed for a while, she did a great video analysing why the Beauty and the Beast film is not indicative of Stockholm Syndrome by actually looking at psychologically what Stockholm Syndrome means.
We'll link it below in case you're interested. But and I think that is something that I really appreciated, because the movie that had preceded this was Little Mermaid, and that is definitely not a believable love story in any way, shape or form, and mildly concerning. I mean, I still love it because it's an amazing film, but like, the characters, for one, Belle has so much more agency. She chooses, yes, obviously she's backed into a corner, but she does choose to stay, and she doesn't just give in to the Beast, and he has to
calls him out on his shit.
She calls him out on his shit. She's intelligent. She's not a damsel in distress. In fact, she saves him. Like, she's not the one who needs to be saved, except for the wolf bit, but like, it's not a traditional, it's not a Cinderella, it's not a Sleeping Beauty, it's not a Little Mermaid. Like, it's a partnership more. He saves her and she saves him. And she develops feeling, she develops love, plus the music, plus
you can't beat the music.
The animation. Like, this is part of the reason why there is an animated category in the Oscars, because it's so beautiful. And, it was one of the first time that we used like rotoscoping in animation and like 3D effects in that ballroom scene and ever. And I love the story so much. It makes me happy every single time I watch it.
Yeah, no, I get emotional watching that film, like at multiple points throughout.
And you could be 9, you could be 99, you'd love this film. But on that note, we should move on to the third one, another one that was on both of our lists, The Princess Bride.
Yes.
So, this is directed by Rob Reiner in his slew of success before.
It's in his prime. Like,
God, I don't know what happened to him, but like, it stars Carrie Elwes, it stars Robin Wright, it stars Andre the Giant, Christopher Guest, like, Wallace Shawn, of course, and Billy Crystal. We can't forget about them. But it's, again, slew of a cast. It also stars Columbo. I don't remember the actor's name. But, it's, again, a storybook, very much that fairy tale-esque.
Incredibly funny.
Very funny, very memorable. And I'm not even coming from a point of nostalgia because I watched it for the first time when I was an adult.
Yes, as did I. I saw it for the first time 4 years ago.
Yeah, similar
and
sort of timing.
It's immediately become one of my, regular rotated films.
As you wish. You know, it's such a great one.
Inconceivable.
You know.
The thing with Princess Bride is that, look, it's a kid's adventure story, but the writing and the dialogue is very witty and incredibly clever.
Witty is the word.
Yeah, and it's part of what makes it so much fun to watch.
So with that, let's just move on to our second one. What is the runner-up, Rob, for the best fantasy film of all time? Not quite, just the second one.
The second best fantasy film of all time is... it can only be The Wizard of Oz. I know a lot of people be like, oh, really? Like, it's so old, and how can it still be that good? And I'm like, well... because it is. It's quite simply beyond reproach. I mean, you can't get away from how monumental that film feels when it goes to color.
It holds up. How old is this movie? It's almost 100 years old.
1939.
Yeah, so it's like what, almost a couple decades off 100 years old, and you will watch it today and you'll be like, yep.
There's a reason why it is literally the most famous movie ever made.
It is so well directed. It's so well told. Judy Garland is magical.
But it's not the best fantasy film.
It's not the best.
No.
All right, are we ready?
We're ready.
Because it is Lord of the Rings, specifically Fellowship of the Ring. And specifically, I had Return of the King on my list and you had Fellowship. And we went with Fellowship because ultimately it works better as its own film.
Yes.
Like if the other two didn't exist, you would still be fine watching Fellowship and then walking away.
Yeah, it might be the film that made me want to work in film.
Yeah.
And to this day, whenever I watch it, I'm still sitting there being inspired by it again and again. It's unbelievable. The spectacle is still better than anything we're getting today, I think. The tension is still better than anything we're getting today. The effects again. The effects have not aged a day. It really
Except on that golem at the very end. He's in shadows. It's fine.
It really was like something where they knew that they couldn't phone this in, and
Peter Jackson knew what he was doing.
He knew what he was doing, and I think the thing that puts The Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring above every other fantasy film is, I got to say, I think it elevated the genre.
I mean, Weta exists because of this film. Like, Weta is what Weta Workshop is right now, which is one of the best visual effects companies and practical effects companies in the world. Yeah. Because of Lord of the Rings, because they had leather makers and chain makers. And so, fun little fact, if you haven't been to Weta Workshop, the guy who is currently the person who provides swords to the Queen of England is the person who creates sword at Weta, and he's not an official swords master because they all just do it for the love. And you can tell every element of the Lord of the Rings films, and speaking on Fellowship in particular, because this is the one that introduces us, it's so lovingly crafted.
The forward momentum of that adventure, those 3 hours fly right by.
Yeah.
And I think that in terms of an adaptation of a very dense book as well, Fellowship, the theatrical version, is
specifically, we should say that.
Yeah, because I know a lot of people are going to say the extended cuts, but to be honest, the extended cuts, you can't show those to somebody who's never watched them. Yeah. Because they do kind of cater more to the fans who already know this world. Fellowship, as theatrically released, is the perfect entry point into the genre, into that world, and just into a whole new style of filmmaking, which we still arguably haven't bettered, since it came out.
And that's why it's the best fantasy film of all time, according to me and Rob.
There are some that didn't make the list, obviously because Alice and I made independent top 10s, so we've got some honourable mentions.
Yep.
Which
we're going to show on the screen.
Right here.
So, you were so close.
Yeah.
And, some of them I really wish we hadn't dropped, some of them Rob really wish we hadn't dropped.
But who knows, if I had watched Paddington 2 before we made the list.
That's true, it was on my list. Yeah, that one was on my list.
Right.
Sorry,
there
Paddington.
On the screen.
Yeah, you can see it right now.
Yeah.
Anyway. But hey, there's only 10 slots.
Yes.
So that is our list. So top 10 best fantasy films of all time. I'm going to run through them again real quick now. And Rob, keep up with me in the text.
Oh dear.
Okay, so we got number 10, Stardust. Number 9, Big Fish. Number 8, Labyrinth. Number 7, The Green Mile. Number 6, Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. Number 5, Pan's Labyrinth. Number 4, Beauty and the Beast, 1990. Number 3, 1990, 1991? Whatever, cut it out. Number 3, Princess Bride. Number 2, Wizard of Oz. And finally, number 1, Lord of the Rings, specifically the theatrical version of Fellowship of the Ring. You know, we'll be back, you know, with the next one of these. Should we reveal what that topic's going to be?
Go for it.
The next top 10, while I might have a big affinity for fantasy film, to be fair, we're now going to do, as the next one, the affinity that Rob most has with genre, which is crime films.
I love my crime.
He loves his crime. He loves his crime. He loves crimes. And with that, you know, thanks for taking a break with Clean Slate. We'll see you next time.
I didn't walk off this time.